Hello everyone. Before the start of the video, I would like to request you all to like, subscribe. That's it. Thank you, and enjoy. Prologue. I thought I would die a normal death. Keyword, normal. But it seems I didn't. I would have to agree, Blanc. Looking at the white silhouette of a human reminiscent of truth in front of him, Blanc didn't have much to say because he did indeed die a rather stupid death. Enjoying a rather entertaining fanfic reading session, and then suddenly a truck had rammed through the wall and instantly killing him. How morbid. But there wasn't much Blanc could even do, seeing as he was a rather normal human who couldn't dodge at the speed of light. So an average man, dead. How tragic. Let's look at the bright side. It seems that the trope of a Rob did indeed exist. How optimistic of a person who just died. Resting their chin on his palm, Rob, somehow without eyes, gave off the feeling of amusement with just his tone. How is that even possible? Anything is possible for me, Blanc. So, you ready to get reincarnated? It wasn't like he could do much against it, so might as well enjoy the reincarnation experience. Who knows, maybe it'll be pretty smooth sailing. Now that's the attitude. Rob clapped in amusement, before manifesting a wheel filled with countless names. So it's this trope then? Yup. Don't fix what ain't broken, you feel me? That's true. Rather, Blanc was kind of grateful that it was like this, instead of some new confusing trope that made everything overcomplicated. Simple was perfect. So, 3 wheels, 1 for the world, 1 for your power, and 1 for your circumstances. That fine with you? Blanc nodded. Sounded pretty good. While it would suck if he landed on a post-apocalyptic world like Last of Us, Warhammer 40k, or even GGZ, there wasn't much Blanc could do other than pray to God or Rob to get a good world. After all, what would something like Six Eyes even do in Warhammer? Let him see his death in Fork? So, it was all in the compatibility. Even if Blanc knew that his future wasn't really in his hands, it was normal to feel nervous looking at the wheels spin at a speed faster than he could even see. Blanc looked at the wheel slowing down, passing worlds like Black Bullet, Absolute Duo, Classroom of the Elite. Well, he sighed in relief when he saw it pass Zenless Zone 0. Rather, any world with a major crisis was a no-no in Blanc's book. Blanc watched as it barely passed Gensokyo with relief and landed on a relatively familiar anime. My Hero Academia. Thank God. Obviously, there was world-ending villains in that world, and the government was kind of corrupt, and don't even add the quirk supremacists. But, wasn't that where the ability made up for it? Blanc hadn't technically finished the anime, rather only getting his information off dropped fanfiction and slander videos. However, that was all he needed to know, that the real issues were all set in Japan. So, what does that mean? He just didn't have to be in Japan when the actual story happened. As simple as that. My Hero Academia. That isn't that bad of a pick. You're pretty lucky, huh? Blanc inwardly nodded. Now your ability. Wait. I have a question. Shoot. Does this power automatically count as my quirk, or is it completely separate? Rob somehow gave an illusion of a grin at the question, humming in thought. I guess it's separate? Nice. Nice indeed, Blanc. So no more questions? Nope. Then here's your power. Without the threat of being placed into a living hell, Blanc was noticeably more relaxed. After all, with the possible threat gone, it was only normal that he didn't place much importance on power. While it obviously would be nice to have a power, Blanc wasn't greedy for much. Why else would he just spend his days reading fanfiction all day? It wasn't like Blanc was an idiot, nor was he shut in. He read it 'cause it was fun. So, in a relaxed demeanor, Blanc watched as the wheel slowed down, passing abilities such as the Sharingan, Limitless, and even Shadow Clones. Well, the shadow clones would be pretty nice. But beggars can't be choosers. As the wheel slowed to a halt, Blanc nodded with satisfaction at the power that was chosen. Shirai Kuroko Template, Toaru no Kagaku no Railgun. I won't be a woman, right? Nope, it's more or less her aim, diffusion field, personal reality, calculation ability, and her esper ability. Of course, how far you get with the template depends on your efforts. Thank Rob. Your gender's a 50-50, it's like it's supposed to be. That isn't much to be thankful for. Who cares much about gender anyway? Everyone's human in the end after all. I can't even refute that. Now here's your final wheel, your circumstances. Without much suspense, Rob quickly spun the wheel, which was equally packed. Blanc didn't expect much from the wheel, until he saw some pretty morbid options that he probably should have expected beforehand. Test subject: abandoned parents. Villain family. Now was the time to pray once again. Blanc watched with anticipation and nervousness, rightfully so. What if he had teleportation, if he was broke and homeless? It wasn't like he was immediately level 4 level in terms of teleportation. Blanc felt his blood go cold, as it just barely passed, son of all for one, before landing on the much better, middle-class average family. Whew! Wow, I think you're the luckiest reincarnate today. Rob nodded in admiration. There was worse? Obviously. I think the worst one for today was GGZ. Blanc inwardly sucked in a deep breath. That's tragic. Yeah, and at that point it didn't even matter what power or family they had, they were cooked either way. Agreed. Well, Blanc, it was nice to see a rather calm guy rather than a pretentious one, or an edgy one, or even one of those guys who think they're going to get a harem just for existing. They actually exist? You'd be surprised. Rob rubbed his face in both frustration and exhaustion, sighing in reminiscence. The faceless head looked up at Blanc one last time. Before you go, I used to not add this part, but after a while, it's surprising how many people forget. What? The people you see, the people you meet, and the people you share experiences with are all real human beings. They aren't fiction, they aren't 2D things you saw through a book or a screen or maybe even a fanfic. They're all humans in which they share the same feelings as you do. So no matter how much you may place some weird expectations, or even try to predict their motivations just because you have prior knowledge, everything will change. Just remember this. You are just as unusual as the fictional characters you may see or meet. You aren't superior just because you saw me. You are human. Same as everyone you will meet. Blanc silently absorbed the words, then nodded. I'm just normal. At that response, Rob gave a smirk before waving at Blanc. It was nice talking to you, Blanc. Enjoy your second life, even if you're too lazy to make much of it. Childhood 1. I have to say, I'm grateful that I'm still male in this life. Not because I'm sexist or anything. I'd simply rather remain the way I was before I died. Blanc, now known as Shunken Ishan, monologued silently as he watched his parents leave for work, waving them by with a smile. While I appreciate the trust you have in me, Mom and Dad, why are you leaving a 5-year-old to his own devices just because he's a little smart? Now alone in the house, Ishun wandered into his father's study. Both of his parents worked relatively normal office jobs and were financially stable. There was little Ishun could reasonably ask for. In fact, being born into the Shunken family was close to optimal for both his personal circumstances and his quirk. Ishun had awakened his quirk at the unusually young age of 2. On the surface, it wasn't particularly impressive. Without the Shirai Kuroko template, it would have been borderline useless, or at least not worth developing in his lazy-ass opinion. His mother, Shunkan Kako, possessed the quirk retrocognition. This quirk allowed her to perceive up to 5 seconds into the past. Rather than replaying events like a recording, it reconstructed recent occurrences by analyzing present conditions such as object positions, residual forces, sound decay, and other environmental traces. The accuracy of this reconstruction depended entirely on Kako's ability to process and quantify environmental data, placing an extreme computational burden on her brain. Over time, the quirk forcibly enhanced her neurological capacity for calculation and probabilistic reasoning, which naturally led her to pursue a career as an actuary. His father, Shunkan Genzai, possessed the quirk hypercognition. Hypercognition dramatically increased Genzai's ability to process real-time sensory input through all 5 senses, allowing him to recognize patterns and causal relationships almost instantly and respond with exceptional efficiency. However, rather than increasing raw intelligence, the quirk accelerated perception, thought, and decision-making. Genzai experienced the world with virtually no perceptual latency, similar to a supercomputer evaluating every viable outcome based solely on incoming sensory data. Because the quirk functioned almost passively, prolonged exposure to unfamiliar or stimulus-dense environments caused severe information overload. When overload occurred, Genzai's nervous system would forcibly shut down via induced sleep as a protective mechanism. As a result, whenever he left familiar environments, Genzai relied on a combination of ear mufflers, blindfolds, and masks to limit sensory intake. While this made him ineligible for a driver's license, his profession as an appraiser required minimal physical travel. Shunkan Ishyun, inheriting traits from both parents, was born with a quirk officially classified as precognition. At least, that was the doctor's conclusion. In actuality, Ishyun's ability did not truly allow him to see the future. Instead, it functioned by aggregating sensory input, performing high-speed probabilistic calculations, and projecting the most plausible near-future outcomes. However, quirk was classified as an emitter type rather than a cognitive derivative of his parents' abilities. The reasoning was simple. Labeling it as a mutant-type cognitive quirk implied permanent neurological alterations that would place an unacceptable processing burden on a child, which was unrealistic just looking at Ishyun's rather painless, bored expression. Emitter classification allowed the precognition to be treated as externally generated phenomena, theoretically reducing the risk of neural overload, which would explain why Ishyun didn't experience any visible burden. The doctor suggested reassessing the quirk once more data became available, but both Genzai and Kako declined further testing. As long as their son was healthy and safe, they agreed to revisit the matter when Ishyun was older. What neither the doctor nor his parents realized was that Ishyun's quirk had been a mutant type from the very beginning. The difference was that the level 4 calculation ability granted by the teleportation template allowed Ishyun to absorb and process information without immediate neurological strain. More importantly, continuous forced quirk-assisted analysis caused Ishyun's computational capacity to grow gradually to accommodate the information, reinforcing itself through use rather than overwhelming him all at once. So while the precognition was technically passive, due to Ishyun's level 4 computational ability, it allowed him to see much further into the future or not see it at all. With Ishyun's computational ability surpassing multiple high-spec computers, this technically allowed for further advancement for teleportation. The technically was in quotation marks for a reason. Ishyun understood that, within the Towaru universe, teleportation operated through interaction with the 11th dimension, requiring precise mathematical formulas to interface with it. Fortunately, Rob had provided the same 11th dimensional interaction formulas used by Shirai Kuroko as part of the template. Unfortunately, that was all he had been given. Without knowing what each parameter represented or how to supply correct values, Ishan was forced to deconstruct the equations piece by piece until he fully understood their function. Complicating matters further, Ishan remembered almost nothing about mathematics beyond a high school level, which meant that he had to effectively start from the beginning. Ishan looked with a dead expression in front of the computer, rubbing his platinum blonde hair in frustration. Linear algebra. The actual bane of his existence. While he could brute force calculations, if he didn't understand what each calculation did, then it was effectively pointless. It may have been relatively simple to just relearn things he had previously learned. When venturing into new territory, it was rather annoying. He'd tried to brute force it earlier, but the pencil he attempted to teleport had ended up partially spliced into a coloring book, fused cleanly through several pages. After multiple desperate and increasingly futile attempts to free the pencil, Ishan had eventually sighed and given up. It wasn't like permeation where it would get pushed out. His working theory was that, due to his personal reality, anything occupying the same space as his teleportation target would be displaced somewhere else, possibly the so-called 11th dimension. Or, in simpler terms, violently erased. So yeah, no more experimenting until he actually understood the mechanics behind the formula. While relying on the organic chemistry tutor was good, it couldn't really compare to actual professors, so this inevitably led to the rabbit hole of searching for recorded college lectures. Staring at a screen this long is definitely going to mess up my eyesight. After an hour of dense explanations, Ishan stretched his short arms, let out a tired sigh, and hopped off the chair. Juice sounded good right about now. Halfway to the kitchen, an unexpected sound echoed through the house. Beep, beep. A guest. With an eyebrow raised, Ishan deigned to ignore the ringing door, making his way to the door viewer his parents installed on their home. A child? Well, he supposed he couldn't judge. He was a kid too. Are they the new neighbors who are moving in this week? He remembered the family next door had moved out after having their 4th child, opting for a bigger house. Damn, were those kids loud as hell. Snapping out of the memory of endless hero and villain games, Ishan focused back on the girl outside. She was inspecting the door with unrestrained curiosity, knocking lightly on the wood and peering at the frame. This looks like the type of person I'd not want to hang out with. Not that he had much room to be picky. The number of friends he'd had in his previous life could be counted on one hand. Still, she looks really familiar though. Sifting through his memories of My Hero Academia, Ishan could somewhat remember who the person in front of him was. Something? Najima? Najimi? Najire? Man, he really sucked with names. Even with that nagging familiarity, Ishan didn't open the door. He was home alone, and while his parents trusted him, he wasn't about to do anything that might get them labeled negligent. It wasn't like his parents were actually negligent. They cared for him and played with him quite a lot, even if it was one-sided. It was more of mutual trust. And damn it if Ishan wouldn't uphold his end of trust. Besides, being home alone was easily a top 5 life experience. Even if he couldn't remember Nej Something's exact personality, her hyperactive demeanor was pretty obvious. Wait. Where did she go? Ishan leaned closer to the screen. The periwinkle-haired girl was gone. Is she a fucking animatronic moving away while I'm not looking? After a moment, he shrugged and turned back toward the kitchen. Guess that solves the problem. At least I can delay meeting her until my parents get home and do that whole Japanese new neighbor greeting thing. Thump. Who? Ishan looked around the house. A ghost. A chill went down his back. Even though Ishin knew that ghosts couldn't exist, it didn't stop him from being scared of horror games. But the question was quickly answered with another thumping noise, coming from the kitchen window. There she was. The periwinkle-haired girl hovered unsteadily in midair, supported by glowing yellow spiral waves of energy twisting around her legs and back. The energy pulsed unevenly, pushing her up in short bursts rather than smooth flight. She was clearly inexperienced. Every few seconds, she'd tilt too far and overcorrect, wobbling like a fish flopping out of water. But despite the clumsiness, she looked thrilled. With a wide, beaming smile, she waved enthusiastically whenever she managed to stabilize herself for more than a second. Ishan just stared. What the hell? Childhood, too. Ishan's first reaction to the periwinkle-haired girl waving at him was, "What the fuck?" Thankfully, Nejire couldn't hear through the window, nor was she an expert at lip reading. The second reaction that Ishan had to Nejire was an awkward wave. For a brief moment, he considered simply ignoring her and closing the curtains. Still, Ishan knew enough about social interactions to understand that arbitrarily antagonizing the neighbors was a bad idea. Nejire, however, didn't seem discouraged in the slightest. If anything, she waved harder once she realized he was responding. Might as well. With a quiet sigh, Ishan grabbed a cushion from one of the dining room chairs and placed it on the floor beneath the window. After that, he unlocked it and slid the window open. As expected, Ishan neatly sidestepped as Nejire lunged forward, watching with a tired expression as she tumbled through the opening and landed face first onto the cushion. At least she didn't get hurt. Nor was he the cushion. With the computational ability far surpassing both his parents, it wasn't surprising that Ishan could calculate a decent amount into the future. Not in clear visions or prophecy, but more like predictive overlays, like looking at future frames in an animation, translucent projections of what could happen based on current motion, senses, and intent. Ishan could easily keep it at a solid 5 seconds in the future, but with any time above 7 seconds, the margin of error was much higher, leading to multitudes of overlapping projections. The future appeared like a warped, semi-transparent 3D playback layered over reality, and leaving it active for too long made him feel extremely nauseous. Ishan didn't know how his quirk was able to see 5 seconds into the future in a lecture. Just through his enhanced senses, watching a lecture 5 seconds into the future was a rather motion sickness-inducing experience. Maybe I should just get used to it at some point. Don't really want my vision to be in Sandevistan Vision 24/7. He mentally filed that thought away and focused back on the present as Nejire bounced to her feet, seemingly unfazed. She stared at him with unrestrained curiosity. "Hello," she said, beaming. "Hello," Ishan replied, returning the smile with effort. "What's your name?" "My name's Hado Nejire. My family just moved here from Akita Prefecture. I'm 7 years old. My quirk is called wave motion." "Oh, what's your quirk? Your hair looks really cool." Ishan watched her step closer with every sentence. "Wait!" He raised a hand. "HM?" She tilted her head. "At least give me a chance to answer your question before you go off on your tangent." He pinched the bridge of his nose. If he didn't interrupt her now, she'd still be talking 5 seconds from now. He consciously dampened his quirk and looked back at her. "What's a tangent?" "Let me ignore that. My name is Shunkin Ishan. I've lived here since I was born and I'm 5. My quirk is precognition. What's precognition? And a tangent is what you were doing just now. Najiri completely ignored her recent question and nodded enthusiastically. Wow, you're really smart. So what was I doing just now? Who knows? This kid might be even worse than the previous neighbors. So what's precognition? Does it have something to do with your hair? Oh, does your hair glow when you use it? But I didn't see your hair glowing earlier. Before I answer any more questions, Ishan said carefully, can we set some rules? Nejiri blinked, then nodded. Her parents set rules too, like not touching dangerous things or not flying indoors without permission. Oh, no. She just broke a rule. She really didn't want to get spanked again. Why did she suddenly go quiet? Ishan watched her expression shift, then sighed. How about one question at a time, he said, and if you break the rule, a flick on the forehead. That snapped her out of it. Huh? Oh, I wasn't paying attention. Ha! Ishan stared at the ceiling. This was going to be a long day. Answering Najiri's seemingly endless questions, both Ishan and Najiri didn't realize that time had passed for a while until someone rang the doorbell once more. The sound cut Najiri off mid-question, just as Ishan was trying to explain the basics of linear algebra. Honestly, if there was someone right in front of him who let him use the Feynman technique without complaint, who was he not to take advantage of it? Who knew? Maybe Nejire was a hidden genius. Maybe she'd end up explaining teleportation theory to him. While Najiri's personality was hard to get used to in the beginning, as a person who did like explaining things, he got used to it relatively quickly. Ring, ring. The doorbell finally snapped Ishan out of it. He stood up from the couch, Najiri immediately following close behind. The height difference due to age might have resulted in an eyebrow twitch on Ishan's end. There wasn't much he could do. He'd heard kids needed a lot of sleep to grow properly, but his own high school self clearly hadn't known anything. He checked the screen beside the door. An unfamiliar woman stood outside, her features strikingly similar to the 7-year-old peeking out from behind him, only older, and visibly worried. Oh, that's my mom. Najir's face lit up instantly. Yeah, it seems so. He moved toward the door, instinctively nudging his precognition, just enough to skim for potential outcomes. Thankfully, it was just mainly awkward conversation and mild scolding to Najiri. Good. He mentally picked out a decent excuse for why his parents weren't home. Oh, that's my mom, Najiri repeated, her tone noticeably different. Ishan glanced back at her, puzzled, then hummed thoughtfully. After all, right on Najiri's forehead was a very noticeable red mark after a few times where Najiri had asked too many questions at once. Was that why? He speculated, but Najiri answered his question soon after. I only said I was going to say hi. Are you serious? Ishan stared at her in disbelief. Najiri, to her credit, seemed to understand exactly how ridiculous that sounded. She flushed slightly and waved her hands defensively. Don't worry, as long as they know I'm safe, they're usually pretty relaxed. She nodded firmly, as if trying to convince herself. I don't know about that one, Chief. Ishan shook his head in exasperation, opening the door. Hello, a child? The woman quickly smoothed her worried expression into something gentler, presumably not to scare the child. Too bad her efforts were on a child who could care less about it. Hello, do you need anything? Oh, I'm Hado Shiori from next door. We just moved in and Najiri-chan? She leaned forward, eyes widening as she spotted a familiar silhouette attempting to hide behind Ishin. Ishin, who knew where the conversation would go, looked at Nejire behind him, no longer with the confident expression she held when reassuring that nothing would happen. "Where's all your confidence now?" Moving out of the way and opening the door fully so Shiori could fully see Nejire, he watched with minor amusement as Shiori quickly grabbed Nejire by the scruff of her clothing. "Oh, here you were, Hado Nejire." Instead of Nejire's previously assured relaxed demeanor, relief and exhaustion warred on Shiori's face as she crouched slightly to meet her daughter's eyes, seemingly ignoring the red mark on her forehead. "Hado Nejire, look at your mother." Nejire obeyed, her expression with a mix of guilt and fear. Guilt for worrying her mom, and fear of the punishment. "Do you have any idea how worried I was?" Shiori continued. "You said you were just going to say hello, and then an entire hour passed without a word. Were you so excited to finally meet a peer that you forgot about us completely?" "No." Nejire's eyes darted around, desperately searching for a lifeline. Finally landing on Ishun, she gave him a pleading look. Ishun met her gaze, utterly unmoved. His expression clearly said, "Nothing I can do." Betrayal stabbed through Nejire's heart, her face naturally forming into a pout. Before she could protest, Shiori gently but firmly tilted Nejire's face back toward her. "And now you're already trying to get your new friend to save you?" Shiori sighed. "Hado Nejire, when we get home, you're getting a spanking." Nejire went pale. She looked between her mother and Ishun in sheer panic, silently begging for help. Looking at Nejire's pitiful expression, Ishun, who was weak to emotional appeal, made to support her, but was immediately intercepted at Shiori, who gave him a kind smile. "Yeah, you're on your own." "Thank you for looking after my Nejire-chan," Shiori said. "As thanks, would you and your family like to come over for dinner?" "Free food?" Even as Nejire resigned herself to her fate, her eyes sparkled again. She looked up at Ishun hopefully. "I'll have to ask my parents once they wake up," Ishun replied, deploying the greatest excuse known to mankind, sleeping parents, "but they'll probably say yes." Shiori nodded. "You don't need to call me Mrs. Hado. Auntie is fine, but I don't think I caught your name?" "Oh yeah, I hadn't introduced myself yet." But before Ishun could even respond, Nejire interjected. "His name is Shunkan Ishun." Shiori calmly covered her mouth. "Sorry about that," she said apologetically. "My Nejire-chan is a little energetic." "It's fine," Ishun said. "And yes, my name is Shunkan Ishun." "Then Shunkan-kun, thank you for spending time with Nejire-chan. I hope you two get along well. Please take care of her." "No problem." "Isn't she older than me?" Judging by Nejire's expression, she'd thought the same thing. She opened her mouth only for Shiori to intercept her again and begin dragging her home. Ishun waved once, which was unseen, and closed the door. Well, that was a weird experience. Childhood 3. Test number 5. Successful. Ishun glanced down at the pencil resting neatly on his desk, its atoms intact and unspliced. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. "This puts a smile on my face." Teleportation was a deceptively troublesome ability, mainly because in his case, it wasn't a naturally self-regulating phenomenon the way most quirks were. This meant that he couldn't just cheat and hope for the best. It wasn't like Endeavor, who didn't need to consciously calculate oxygen ignition or heat expansion every time he used his flames. That man could just think of fire hot, and his body would probably combust into flames. While it did have some similarities with the personal realities of espers, they still worked in opposite ways. Most quirks acted like extensions of the body. Once activated, the mutation handled the technical details automatically, compensating for human error. Isshin's teleportation from the Shirai Kuroko template offered no such assistance. In essence, it lacked an internal correction mechanism. The ability responded exactly to what he calculated through formulas with practically no margin of error. Success depended entirely on his ability to define space, distance, and orientation within vector space. While quirks primarily compensated for human error, teleportation was the complete opposite. Teleportation, or more specifically Shirai Kuroko's teleportation, worked on the basis that the user themselves are the reference point. While this undeniably made the calculation process much easier as a result, it had a lack of flexibility. Ironically, that lack of flexibility was what made it learnable. It had taken Isshin roughly 1 year to teleport reliably using himself as the reference point without disorientation, misalignment, or cellular damage. Rather, due to the constant intake of sensory data, due to the mutant changes brought by precognition and passive utilization of his computation, Isshin could even say his computative abilities surpassed that of Shirai Kuroko. Processing vectors, distances, and mass distributions came almost reflexively to him now. It wouldn't be as exaggerated as teleporting an entire house to a different location. It was entirely plausible for Isshin to teleport cars. Isshin hadn't had the opportunity to experiment on distance, but that was for another time. Rob hadn't said that he would be limited to how strong Shirai Kuroko was in the Towaru universe. Well, that extent would still undoubtedly be overpowered in this universe. After all, was it even possible to dodge an instantaneous attack which could result in an instant KO with an object placed directly into their head? Enough digression. After a few experiments on teleportation without using himself as a reference point, what Isshin discovered was that attempting to use teleportation without any reference point was near impossible with his personal reality. The Earth was never stationary in the universe, with the Earth constantly in movement, and in order to prevent any accidental murders or splicing, Isshin gave up on that route. However, moving things around him using himself as the reference point was plausible. The reason why Shirai Kuroko couldn't move anything without being in contact with that object or person was that teleporting mainly involved moving objects away from the origin point herself through the 11th dimension. What Isshin was doing was creating a domain where he himself was the origin point as a reference point, not the takeoff point. This normally wouldn't be possible, but with the combination of the main effect of his quirk, which granted him a near-omnipresent awareness, it was equally as easy to make a graph on everything around him. What happened just now was an attempt at teleporting a pencil on the floor to the desk without any issues. And it was successful. Maybe I am a genius after all. Isshin stretched and let out a tired breath. Well, that's enough experimenting for the day. Might as well take a nap. Of course. Before he could even reach his bed, he sighed and shuffled toward the window. He pulled the curtains open just in time for bang, bang, bang. Shun-chan, wanna go play? This girl and that beaming smile. Nejire. Yeah? She tilted her head, eyes sparkling. Isshin hesitated for half a second before sighing. Sure. They said you couldn't spit on a smiling face. Turns out they were right. Nice. Now in the Shunken family's backyard, Nejire put her hands on her hips in contemplation. So, what should we do? You have to be kidding me. I'm going back. Before Ishun could take even one step, a pair of hands latched onto his shoulders. Wait! I was just joking, Nejire whined. Eh? What was that he for? Nothing? She tilted her head, putting on a clearly fake look of innocence. Yeah, I'm heading back inside. I've decided, Nejire cut in. Decided what? To get a job? Let's be heroes, she declared, flashing a confident grin. Heroes? Nejire was already bouncing on her heels, clearly excited. Why? Ishun tilted his head in actual confusion. At one point, Ishun had entertained the idea of becoming a hero, being reincarnated into a world literally called My Hero Academia made that train of thought almost unavoidable, but in reality, heroes had always felt distant to him. In the 6 years of life he'd experienced so far, his interactions with heroes and villains had been limited almost entirely to television. While the classification he was born with was the middle-class average family, with both parents having jobs, meant that their income bracket was technically in the middle-high class of society. This meant that the living conditions weren't near any crime-heavy areas. And with Ishun being a homebody, plus parents who neither idolized heroes nor placed much importance on them, heroes existed in his life only as a concept. From his perspective, they were essentially just a more marketable version of the police. Why, you ask? Nejire froze. That question had caught her completely off guard. For someone as naturally curious as Nejire, it wasn't strange that a job involving flashy quirks, dangerous situations, and meeting tons of interesting people appealed to her. It was like asking a kid if they wanted to be famous. Most kids would answer yes without hesitation. But knowing Ishun for the past year, she could already imagine the look he'd give her, like she was some kind of idiot. And that annoyed her. She wanted to erase that image he had of her. She was his senpai after all. Yet for an entire year now, he hadn't shown her even a shred of the respect an elder deserved. Every kuhai at her elementary school respected her even if she was only in 2nd grade. Even her parents sometimes mistook Shun-chan for the older one when they played together. Look at the height difference. Look. She was a full-fledged 2nd grader, thank you very much. Shun-chan wasn't even in elementary school yet. Why is she looking at me like that? Ishun watched as Nejire's face slowly twisted into a pout, her thoughts clearly spiraling out of control. Shun-chan. Yeah? I want to become a hero to save everyone. She definitely copied that straight from All Might, 100%. Still, Ishun hadn't asked the question to be philosophical. They were kids after all, and kids were supposed to have fun, not plan out their entire futures before they even learned what a job application was. What was the point of worrying about adulthood now? They practically had their whole lives ahead of them. Really, he just wanted to see if Nejire would try to sound thoughtful. With her hyperactive, almost paramecium-like personality, even a clumsy excuse would mean she'd put some thought into it. But kids were whimsical by nature. Wasn't there a saying that mature children were the most heartbreaking, or something like that? Wow, Nejire, Ishun said flatly, I didn't know you could even think that far ahead. Thanks. So, what do we do to become heroes? Well, I heard they have to go to UA, just like All Might. Do they? Yeah. So how do we get into UA? How do we get into UA? Now why in the world are you the one asking the question? Childhood 4. In the Shunkin family's backyard, there were 2 children, one sitting down and another standing up. Ishun was the one sitting, mentally exhausted after explaining a severely dumbed-down version of the Japanese education system, hero schools, and professional licenses. A few steps away, Nejire stood with her hands raised, bright spirals of energy spilling from her palms. They released small, uneven bursts of wind that fluttered the grass and kicked up dust. Okay, so if I just do it like this, whoa. The spirals wobbled violently and fizzled out. So basically, Nejire continued without pause. All I have to do is pass an entrance exam, and I can be a hero, right? She blinked, expression unusually focused as she watched her quirk misbehave. It's supposed to spin more, I think. Or maybe faster? Do you think faster helps? Ishan hesitated, tilting his head and tuning out Nejire's muttering about her quirk. Well, I guess so. It was clear that both Ishun and Nejire had drastically oversimplified the steps it took to become a hero. Then we can both be heroes. Yeah, sure. Ishan was one of those kids who didn't really know what he wanted to do in the future, so if someone else decided for him, all the better. It was the privilege of being a child, even if the person deciding for him was a paramecium. Wasn't your quirk pre-something? Precognition. Yeah, that. Her quirk training already forgotten, Nejire plopped down on the grass across from him, legs crossed. So how does it work? Thankfully, despite Ishan having answered this exact same question multiple times over the course of their year-long friendship, it seemed his long-term efforts to curb Nejire's question spamming were finally paying off. He was so proud. Ishan had made some new discoveries about his quirk, but explaining things like sensory input and Laplace's demon to an 8-year-old would only open the door to an entirely new barrage of questions, which Nejire would absolutely forget by the end of the day anyway. So Ishan dumbed it down. I can see 5 seconds into the future. Nejire's eyes lit up as she remembered, nodding enthusiastically. Then that means you can definitely be a hero, right? Maybe? At the vague answer, Nejire puffed out her cheeks before suddenly brightening with an idea. Well, if you can't be a hero, then I'll definitely let you work for my agency in the future. Nepotism is truly for the win. What's nepotism? Realizing that he had accidentally opened up a can of worms that Nejire wouldn't even remember tomorrow, Ishun sighed inwardly. So, what are you two doing? Kako, having come home early, took in the scene. Ishun sprawled on the grass, sweating, and Nejire lying right beside him, staring up at the sky. Welcome back, Mom. Welcome back, Auntie. I'm back. So, Nejire-chan, what did you and Shun-kun play today? We didn't play. We were training, Nejire declared, beaming. Really? Kako raised an eyebrow, looking at her quintessentially lazy son in questioning. Ishan gave a resigned nod. Nejire saw it as training. Ishan saw it as an unfortunate cardio session. Nejire had decided that flying was important because heroes flew. That was reason enough for her. Unfortunately, every attempt ended the same way, a burst of spirals fizzling out, a wobble, and... Ah! Ishan was already moving. Because he knew beforehand. He didn't stop her from trying, because without any failure or any attempts made, she wouldn't grow. Instead, he positioned himself where she would land, arms braced. Again. And again. To Nejire, it was obvious everything was fine. Ishan was there, just before she fell onto the grass. The yard was soft and she hadn't gotten hurt yet. Nejire had completely convinced herself that, since she was under supervision by a child younger than her, training outdoors in a private backyard not even her own, everything was perfectly safe. Additionally, and completely unintentionally, keeping Nejire safe meant Ishun had to push his precognition further than usual in response, because on some occasions, 5 seconds just wasn't enough. This led to him getting used to the information input at the 7-second range, as a side effect, even if it wasn't intended. In the end, the whole thing devolved into a game of catching the falling Nejire. "Catch me if I fall," Nejire laughed. It was worse, because she was slightly taller than him, which meant he had to calculate angles, momentum, and how not to let either of them get hurt. Multitasking at its finest. Thankfully, her quirk ran on stamina. Otherwise, the session might have gone on far longer than comfortable. "So," Kako said after a moment, "are you going to be a hero in the future, Shun-kun?" She sounded genuinely curious. Her perpetually lazy son suddenly showing signs of ambition was new. Still, it was nice to hear. "I'll probably be a janitor for Nejire's agency," Ishun replied flatly. "No," Nejire popped up. "He saved me every time. That's totally hero stuff," she insisted. Kako blinked. Now she looked even more incredulous. Her son, saving someone? She thought they were just training. Under his mother's probing gaze, Ishun sighed. "I just stopped her from falling. That's all." "Hey, is that so?" Kako hummed. "What's that look for, Mom? You're not seriously shipping 2 kids, right?" "Well then," she said cheerfully, ruffling both their heads, "I look forward to both of your hero careers, Nejire-chan." She turned toward the house, then paused. "Oh, and Nejire-chan, would you like to stay for dinner?" Nejire brightened, then hesitated. "Can I ask my parents?" "I already did. They said you could decide." "Then I'll eat with Shun-chan." Ishun promptly ignored his mother's pointed look. Once the sliding glass door closed, Nejire turned back to him, eyes sparkling. "So, should we train more?" "Let's do different training next time," Ishun said, shaking his head. "Like what?" "Isn't your quirk based on your stamina? How about walking?" "But walking is boring," Nejire protested. "Then how about we go to the park nearby?" While the thought of going that far exhausted him, if it meant other children could take the aggro of Nejire's enthusiasm, it was worth it. Her eyes lit up. "The far one?" "Yeah. But Mom definitely won't let me go that far without her," she pouted. "Well, we can probably ask when I walk you home." "Really?" "Yeah, probably." "Then let's go!" With renewed energy, Nejire spun toward the gate, seeing as they did live right next to each other after all. Ishun, running on fumes, stopped her. "How about we ask today, and if she says yes, we go tomorrow?" "Please say yes." Nejire thought it over, realized she'd probably be tired after dinner, and reluctantly nodded. "Okay? Let's go." I completely forgot how to explain how Ishun's precognition worked in the previous chaps, but it's essentially using the concept of Laplace's demon in order to create an outline of what the future could be. This means that his senses intake an enormous amount of information, which is only curbed by Ishun's passively advancing computational ability through the Shirai Kuroko template. I still don't know whether to do harem or not, but if I ever do harem, Nejire is 100% in it. I also hope I did her personality justice in this chapter again. Getting to UA will probably take a while. Sorry? Childhood, 5. Wow. When are we leaving, Shun-chan? Why is this kid in my room? Ishun stared at the periwinkle-haired girl, standing right next to his bed. far too close for comfort, like it was something out of a cheap horror movie. She just scared the shit out of me. Why are you in my room at? Ishun looked at the electronic clock on the side of the bed. It read 8:12 a.m. You can't be serious. Didn't Mom say I could leave early as long as you were watching me? Najir said brightly. So, when are we leaving? She tilted her head, eyes practically sparkling with anticipation. She did say that. Although she probably didn't expect us to leave the house before noon. Maybe later? Why? Najira asked immediately. Don't we get more time to play if we go early? She countered, her tone filled with the earnest logic of an 8-year-old. That's such a good argument, I don't even know how to respond to that. It's so early that when we get there, there probably won't be many people to make friends with, Ishan said after a moment. Thankfully, that made Najire pause. She hummed thoughtfully, as if the idea had never occurred to her before. After a few seconds, she reluctantly nodded, her lips pulling into a small pout. Ishan should have felt relieved. Instead, he hesitated, then sighed. He rolled onto his side, too tired to bother pulling the blanket with him, just in time for Nejire to leap onto the bed. Then I'll just take a nap too. Yeah, Ishun muttered. Facing away from Najire, Ishun closed his eyes to get at least a few more minutes or even hours more sleep. Not even a second later, he sighed inwardly. Nejire, just go to bed. He heard a soft giggle behind him before it went quiet. Thank Rob. How did she even get in my room, anyways? So, when are we leaving now? When Ishun woke up the next time, it seemed that he had rolled around in his sleep, being face to face with Nejire, his white eyes locked with Nejire's excited blue eyes. This girl doesn't even look like she slept. Ishun slowly sat up and checked the time. 11:28 a.m. Well, that's better. Right after I wash up. Yay! So how long will that take? Najire asked immediately. Soon. How long is soon? Ishun paused, rubbing his eyes. Soon as in, not long. Oh, Najir nodded seriously, then squinted at him. Like 5 minutes soon, or 10 minutes soon, or adult soon, where it's actually like half an hour? She's disturbingly perceptive for her age. 5 minutes, Ishun said flatly. Okay, Najire chirped. She hopped off the bed, then popped right back into his line of sight. Should I count, out loud, or quietly, or do you want reminders every minute so you don't forget? I will remember. Are you sure? Yes. Because a week ago. I remember, Ishun interrupted, already standing up. Najira beamed, completely unbothered. Okay, I'll be right here. Why do I feel like that was a threat? Also, Najira, you're getting a flick once I'm done. What? 4 questions all at once? You want 3 flicks or 1? I'll take the 1. Did you let Najira in my room, Mom? Of course I did, Kako replied cheerfully. She looked so excited to go to the park today. She glanced at her son with open schadenfreude. If Najire didn't exist, this lazy boy would probably be holed up in his father's study all day. He really needed some vitamin D. Just look at how pale he was. Kako handed Ishun an old-looking flip phone. I put a new SIM card in it this morning. Mine and Shiori's numbers are already saved, so if anything happens, call either of us. Ishun nodded, taking the phone. You know how it works, right? Kako asked, just to be sure. Yep, Ishun pressed a few buttons, scrolling through the contacts to confirm. If we think you're responsible enough, we'll get you a real phone when you start elementary school. Now, that's something to be excited about. Aw, Nijiri whined, having listened in without even pretending otherwise. My mom says I can't get a phone until middle school. For good reason, Ishun muttered, earning an amused look from Kako. Oh, and here, Kako handed him some bills. 2,000 yen. If you get hungry, buy snacks for yourself and Nejire. Thanks, Mom. No problem. Now have fun, okay? Yeah. As they headed out, Kako pressed a piece of toasted bread slathered with jam into each of their hands. Getting to the park wasn't technically difficult. In fact, it was extremely simple. It was only one bus stop away. While Ishun didn't really understand why there wasn't a park or playground closer to home, he did know it was one of the main reasons families with younger children didn't live in the neighborhood. Most of the kids around here were already in middle or high school. Nijiri already had a Suica card given from her mom before she left, so after waiting for the next bus, they arrived without any trouble. Without even waiting for Ishun, Nejire marched straight up to the nearest mutant-type quirk user, a kid with a hair of grass and flowers, and immediately began firing off question after question. Well, as long as it isn't me, I'm all for it. For younger children, having someone so openly fascinated by the very traits they wanted to feel special about was undoubtedly a good thing. Since Ishun didn't really have a purpose at the park beyond bringing Nejire here and making sure she got back, he headed toward the nearest bench and settled down. Might as well try make a teleportation domain with the introduction of moving variables. After modifying the 11th dimensional interaction formula enough to remove the need for direct contact, even if it currently only worked on something as simple as a pencil, Ishun was essentially set as long as he adjusted the parameters properly. If there was a limitation, it would be distance. He had never tested the upper bounds directly, but he could estimate the point at which his computational abilities would no longer be able to keep up with the constantly shifting variables. Past that specific threshold, the margin of error became so large that attempting teleportation at all would be little more than a gamble. Right now, if Ishun used the method of using himself as the origin point and the takeoff point, then the theoretical max distance without any margin of error was around 150 meters. For the teleportation after creating a domain in which everything was graphed, it was around half that, at 75 meters. Of course, this was all theoretical, based on calculations done at home. He'd never actually tested it outside, nor bothered trying. If he failed or got caught, that would be a pain. Not that he was afraid of failing, 'cause it wouldn't happen. With the movement of children and adults throughout the park, his teleportation domain shrank slightly due to the increased influx of information. The direct origin method, however, remained unaffected. Another benefit of the Kuroko method, I guess. Given the physical changes to his brain structure and nerve composition, the effective range would likely increase as his computational abilities grew with age. No reason to worry too much. His computational abilities would probably grow as long as he used it a lot, similar to a muscle. Even his precognition quirk was more used when there was more info in his general location. AFK farming, son? Never mind. Ishun glanced in Nejire's direction just in time to hear her call out to him, surrounded by a growing crowd of kids. Shun-chan! Of course. Well, I did say this counted as stamina training when I suggested it. Making his way over, Ishan took in the scene. There were a lot of kids. How did Najir befriend this many people in, like, 10 minutes? Let's play Heroes and Villains. This stupid-ass game again? To be continued. Thank you all for watching.